Major looming question: how many of New York's prisons are actually on the chopping block? The governor made it very clear that he believes the correctional system is both bloated and outdated. In his State of the State address, he roundly condemned the practice of using prisons as economic engines for job-starved upstate cities, and he was then widely hailed by Black and Latino elected officials and prisoner advocates for these comments. But it is quite a different story entirely for those upstate communities where lost prison jobs would be very hard to replace, even with that extra economic development aid that the governor is offering to soften that blow. Here to discuss this issue with me is Assemblywoman Addie Russell. She is a North Country Democrat. Thank you very much for being here, Assemblywoman.
My pleasure.
So there have been some reports in the last couple of days that the $10 million that the governor is dangling out there, saying this will be additional aid to make it easier for you when I shut down your prison, isn't really going to be cutting it for people who live in your district and others upstate.
I don't believe so. Just the Ogdensburg prison alone, the payroll is twice as much as what the governor is proposing as a one-time influx of cash to help ostensibly, redevelop the property.
Right. I mean, and also, what do you do with a prison? You've been inside, I've been inside, not Ogdensburg, but a lot of them, they're sort of singular properties. You can't just turn it into something else easily. There's been proposals of feasibility studies, maybe. Do you think that's actually wise?
I'm not sure if you'd just be throwing money away on a feasibility study. For instance, we have industrial parks that have vacancies, so I'm not sure a business would choose to locate in a former prison versus an industrial park which is set up for new businesses to come in.
Right.
There's also other unique facets of our prisons and where they're located, such as Ogdensburg, that is co-located with a mental health facility and also has a sex offender confinement unit on the most valuable portion of that property, which would really make it very difficult to redevelop property around it.
You also had said in a news package that we saw earlier today, you were quoted in that, saying that you were hoping that maybe that money that the governor is sort of dangling out there would be more appropriate or attractive to downstate prisons that really might actually have a shot at redeveloping, whereas the upstate facilities would be left alone.
That's correct. For years, I've heard people talk about, for instance, Sing Sing, which is apples and oranges with my prisons, which in my district, which are medium facilities. But there are very valuable pieces of property that the state owns and have prisons on.
Well, Sing Sing's right along the river, right? It's right along the Hudson River. Sure.
That's correct, and there's a lot of developers that would like to get their hands on it.
Yep.
But that brings up another interesting thing, when we're talking about prisons, is the fact that our maximum security prisons are at 122% capacity. We have more hardened criminals in our system, primarily because we have focused on rehabilitation programs and alternatives to incarceration.
Right.
And at some point, we're going to have to look at right-sizing the level of, the prisons at the maximum and the medium level, because we may end up needing more max beds than medium, which would actually be maybe we have to build more prisons.
Or maybe repurpose some of the mediums that where these 3,500 empty beds are and make them more safe so you could move somebody who was a little bit more high caliber of an offender in.
That's possible. I don't represent one prison. It's 10 miles out of my district, but they have 200 units that are really more like a max facility, and perhaps we should be looking at adding some max capability to some of our medium prisons throughout the state.
What's really sort of the interesting dichotomy here is, first of all, I've said it a couple times, but you are a Democrat. You find yourself in this particular instance probably more allied with the Senate Republicans. This issue politically is very difficult because the governor made it very clear in a strident moment at his State of the State, when he was roundly applauded by a lot of your colleagues. What did you feel at that moment, and what have your constituents said to you when he said we can no longer use upstate prisons as jobs for basically, look, for white people on the backs of people who are Black and Latino who are incarcerated far from home?
What I have been telling my colleagues in the Democratic Conference is that our facilities in the North are much safer. There are fewer incidents of inmate on staff and inmate on inmate altercations. Inmates that are up north also tend to have better results in their rehabilitation programs. They score far better on their GEDs. Passage rate is higher. you can look at that type of empirical data, and if I were a family member of someone who was incarcerated in the system, I would want them to be safe, and I would also like them to have good outcomes based on the rehabilitation programs they're in.
This dovetails with economic development, which is another issue that you're concerned with. The governor has sort of talked about regional economic development councils. This is obviously not also unique to you. A number of people who are in the area, local elected officials and state lawmakers, are saying, well, okay, we understand what you're trying to do, but we don't like the way you're setting it up. You've got counties that are smushed together that maybe shouldn't be. They don't have shared interests, and it's not exactly clear how this is going to work. Again, light on the details in some of this budgetary proposal situation, waiting for those details, and we still haven't seen them.
No, but the good thing is, I spoke to Lieutenant Governor Duffy about this issue specifically, and he said to please forward him the information that I had. So I have been reaching out to stakeholders in my region and talking more, about aligning, my council, or the council that my district is in, along a north-south axis on Route 81. We already have existing relationships that are already working very well. Instead of trying to create new relationships with parts of the state that we have never had a relationship with. And so, I am, collecting all this information at different points of view, and will be presenting it to the Lieutenant Governor for further consideration.
You were elected, what year were you elected now again?
I'm just starting my second term.
Okay, so we've been talking in Albany about, and you've been listening as a resident of the North Country, about reinvigorating the economy of the North Country and Western New York, and even slightly north of Albany, which is a little bit insulated because of government and higher ed, et cetera. For years, we've been talking about it. Do you believe that it's possible that this option would work? What it does really is pits Region A against Region B to compete for money, for economic development funds.
It appears as though the future is some competition, but I think that in the North Country we can compete just as well as any other place. We have ports, we have 3 bridges to Canada. In the North Country we have wonderful colleges and universities, which are also the center of the governor's plan to reinvigorate our economy. We have very hardworking people. They say anecdotally, if they had an option to choose, someone who grew up and worked on a farm or someone who didn't, they'd hire the farmer, and we've got a lot of them. So I think we are seeing economic growth in the North Country, notwithstanding the fact that the economy still isn't turning around very well. But we are seeing bright spots, and I think that will continue.
I just want to touch base 1 minute on the education, which is another area that I'm going to be talking to a number of lawmakers about. People are obviously concerned about their schools. They're concerned about the property taxes. The governor says that he believes that the $2.85 billion, with a B, worth of education aid is going to be able to be absorbed by many districts because they're sitting on reserves. Now, in 2008, State Comptroller DiNapoli had an audit that said $400 million worth of taxpayer dollars were being harbored by about 200 and change schools in reserve inappropriately, he said. Your schools, your school districts are generally not those districts with the leftover cash.
That's correct. If my school districts were required to use their reserves in order to fill this gap into the near future, they would be structurally bankrupt within 1 to 3 years, many of them, with a very few exceptions. It would be, we don't have the reserves. So this is going to be either cutting entire programs. I had one representative from a school call and say, we will be closing our reading program down. Another school, another school district is looking at cutting 25 positions on top of what they've cut before. We are talking about getting to the point where we will not be able to provide the education that the state requires to certify someone for graduation.
Well, okay. We were going to be weighing in with you again, and a lot more lawmakers, I'm sure. But Assemblywoman Russell, thank you very much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you.